like that song. It is a great song. All right. Anyone else have testimony they want to share tonight? We could go on too long. All right. Proverbs 6 is where we're going to be tonight. Proverbs chapter 6. I decided we're going to just kind of hang around in Proverbs here for a little bit. I thought they might be just encouraging little segments as we have kind of a small period of time here before we know for sure what's going to be happening. So I thought this would be a good one. So what I actually have been doing is I've been going back. I went into my sermon notes, and I always have my sermon folder arranged by latest date. That way, when I come to pull up my notes, I have the newest one, whatever I worked on is always on top. So I thought I'm going to flip this thing backwards, and I went back to messages I prepared 20 years ago because I started in pastoral ministry 20 years ago this summer. So I thought, well, this will be interesting. See if I still agree with myself or not. So I noticed I had done a number of messages out of Proverbs, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to revisit these and have kind of rebuilt them. So Proverbs chapter 6. I want to look at the first 11 verses. I think this segment of Proverbs is, again, still the My Son section. Normally Proverbs is a verse or two, and they don't typically go together. They're arranged sometimes thematically, sometimes they're just kind of all in a group of sayings. But these kind of go together. So you'll notice as we look at this, verses 1 through 5 are going to be about one particular topic, and verses 6 through 11 are going to be about another particular topic, but I think they both go together. In tonight's message, I'll just simply entitle it, Having Character. The idea that God's design for humanity involves each person being responsible for themselves. And as we look at our world today, I think we certainly all agree that the content of this passage is certainly relevant for today. Let's look at verse 1 of Proverbs 6. My son, if you become surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands and pledged for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Verse 6, go to the ant, you sluggard. Now, if you're not familiar with the term sluggard, the word sluggard means lazy person. So it says, go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? Just a little sleep. Just a little slumber. I'm adding the just a little. Okay, you guys can see that. Just a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. Father, we thank you for these truths this morning, and help us, Lord, to be the kind of people who are diligent and take responsibility. In Christ's name, amen. I think these two segments are interesting. They certainly have individual character of their own, but I think there's also a theme that goes across the two of these. It's the theme of human responsibility. Like we said, I think God's design for humanity involves each person being responsible for themselves. And this is something that I think was at one point ingrained in American culture, which is becoming less and less ingrained in our culture. But it's a biblical idea. The history will talk about the Judeo-Christian work ethic. And that work ethic that has been part of our culture historically is something that is really a biblical idea, or an idea that encourages us toward biblical wisdom. And I want to look at this tonight because I think I think it'll be beneficial for us. So these two ideas make a couple of our points tonight. So number one, I want to challenge you with the idea that it would be foolish to unnecessarily carry another's responsibility. It would be foolish to unnecessarily carry another's responsibility. This talks about, in verse 1, the idea of becoming surety for your friend. So if you look at that first verse, you remember Proverbs doesn't rhyme poetry like we do in English. We rhyme with meter and verse, but in Hebrew, or which was the language the Old Testament was written in, they rhyme in idea. So you can see the ideas rhyming in the first two phrases that make up verse 1 there. It says, "My son, if you become surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger." Now, I think in the context, this person that's being challenged here is the kind of person who, at least in this circumstance, would have become surety for someone they probably would not have known well. The first phrase calls them a friend, but you'll notice the second phrase calls them a stranger, someone you don't really know well. And I'll give you, I think, the other side of this idea as we move forward. But what is this idea of being surety for someone? It's an interesting process, of course, in Bible times. Business loans often required some form of collateral. Now, it's different today, right? Because we have FICO and Experian, and we have this thing called credit scores, and we have credit bureaus, right? And somebody can look at your history, and they can pull up your credit score, and they can tell how much money they owe, and how you are about repaying your debts, and you have some form of credit history. So for most adults in today's culture, this idea of it being surety for someone is not something we run into very often because we have credit scores. And even for those who don't have good credit, there are places where you can still borrow money at high interest rates, which, by the way, you should never do. They're not the topic of tonight. But all of those places, I just want to go burn every single one of them down because all they're doing is taking advantage of people in need. But anyway, another night. Surety for a stranger. So there was required some form of collateral in case of death or failure. And if you were to take out a business loan from someone, generally they didn't have banks so much in those days. But if you were to take a loan from someone else, usually in the form of business, this I don't think is describing somebody needing help personally for living expenses. I think that's another category. But this would be the idea of a loan. Well, a person who had no collateral, who had no land that they could use as collateral, or who had no money that they could use as collateral, would be required to have a co-signer. And that was a friend who was called their surety. So that second person would agree to guarantee repayment of the debt. And that second person, as the surety, as the co-signer, would become, number one, either the motivator to make that person pay off their debt, because certainly they would want someone who is close to them to say, you better pay this, because if you don't pay this, then I'm going to have to pay this. Or number two, a person who would become responsible to repay the debt themselves. So sometimes that could be a business partner. If you are in that business with them, if you are borrowing money to start some form of business or to go and do a venture and you are a part in that, you might be a co-signer on that as well. So this was the idea of surety. So as the proverb begins, it uses this example of somebody becoming surety for someone else, and it really warns as you read this, it warns you that this is a foolish thing to do. This being surety for someone else is certainly not something that you want to do, especially for someone you don't know well. Because, letter B, people tend to be motivated by requirements, don't they? I often laugh. I told you this morning, and many of you know I taught for 11 years. When you are a teacher, you have to be very direct with your students about what's required and what's not. So, in fact, it's kind of funny because not only do you have to be upfront about what's required and what's not, but oftentimes you have to be upfront about what's graded or not. Because if you give out an assignment, the students will often look right at you and say, is this graded or is it not? And what are they asking? Yeah, how much effort do I need to put into this, right? Because if it's graded, I suppose I better put some effort into it. If it's not graded, I got these video games calling my name when I get home, right? So people have a tendency to be motivated by what's required, don't they? There's an old statement, which I think is a proverbial statement that goes along with this. It's that people don't do what's expected, they do what's inspected. And isn't it true? If you can tell someone, yeah, I would love for you to do this, but I'm never going to come back and check to see if you did it, are they really going to do it? And the answer is probably not. Because if they're not required to do it, it takes a special kind of person to actually have the character enough to be able to do what's expected if it's not being inspected. You see, it is very unwise for us to carry other people's burdens so that they don't have to be responsible. Now, in this case, the author is warning his son to say, oh, you got yourself roped into one of these situations where you're surety for someone else. Well, you better make sure that you are diligent to force this person to do what they are supposed to be doing. Because we shouldn't carry other people's burdens so that they don't have to be responsible. So for the author telling his son, he says, you need to make sure that you hunt this person down. Notice how he describes it. He says, go and humble yourself. Okay, what does that mean? Well, you might look at this situation you've now put yourself in, and you might go, you know what, I shouldn't have to go to this person and remind them about every single detail of what they're supposed to do. But if you have made yourself responsible for what they are supposed to do, if you had better make sure that they do what they are supposed to do, and you had better humble yourself and go make yourself involved in what they are supposed to be doing. He says, humble yourself. He says, plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids, so that you can deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter. It requires real diligence on your part to be surety for someone else. And it's kind of funny in a sense, because what you're doing is taking responsibility off of one person that they ought to be carrying and putting it on yourself. So now not only are you carrying your responsibility, but you're also carrying their responsibility as well. It's a foolish thing for you to do. And you can end up really quickly in these situations where you can find yourself carrying other people's responsibilities in a way that you really shouldn't. It's not healthy for you to carry other people's responsibilities, is it? For you to be the kind of person who does all of those things, sometimes it may be what gets things done, it's not good for the other people around you. We have a term for this now in modern psychology. You become an enabler. You allow people to be irresponsible by taking on their responsibility. So we shouldn't carry others' burdens so that they don't have to be responsible. It's a foolish and unnecessary thing. So let me give you a word to coworkers. You're probably in a situation, if you haven't been or you will be, where you might get paired up with other people, either at work in a team arrangement or with doing group projects, or if you're in school, if you have school projects that you have to do, you're at some point in life going to get paired up with other people where you are going to be required to work with others. Make sure that you're not carrying other people's burdens, other people's responsibilities, but that they are carrying their own. Make sure that there's a clear delineation of duties right away at the beginning that's known by your teacher or your supervisor. One of the most frustrating things can be being involved in a group project with a person who's lazy, right? They need to know what their job is, and they need to be held responsible for carrying their portion of the work. Now, if it's at work, that might be your job. That might be part of your responsibility as part of your team leader responsibilities or as part of your supervisory role. So maybe that is your job to be that person who is diligent in humbling yourself and pleading with them and giving no sleep to your eyes or slumber to your eyelids to deliver yourself. But if you happen to be co-workers as equals working together on the same project, make sure that there's a clear delineation of duties that everybody understands. It's your job to do the oral report. It's my job to do the PowerPoint, okay? It's your job to do the written report, and we put this all together and make sure everyone knows where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do. It can be awkward at the beginning to pin everyone down, to say this is what's supposed to happen, and this is when it's supposed to be done, and this is how it's supposed to be done. But if you don't, you might find yourself holding the bag for the project, right? If the other people don't come through on their part. And make sure that the teacher or the supervisor knows this is what we've done. This is our, we've decided to do this, 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 and this. So that you can be diligent in doing your part, but the other person also diligent in doing theirs. A word to friends. Sometimes you can find yourself in some awkward situations when it comes to finances and friends. Don't ever co-sign for a friend. Sometimes you might get asked, hey, can you co-sign this loan for me? It doesn't happen so much today. As it used to in times past. There might have been. Friends have family. Let their family be their family, and you can be their friend. Don't carry those responsibilities or those burdens for somewhere else. I think more often today, young people who are growing up are more likely to get caught in a situation like this if they go and they sign a lease to share an apartment. And if you can picture this, if any of you have ever done this before, right? You share an apartment with a friend, and there's always a question, whose name is the lease going to be in? And you end up in one of these arrangements where, okay, the rent for the apartment's $900 a month. I'll pay $450 and you pay $450, and whose name is the lease going to be in? Well, remember, if you put the lease in your name, you're the one who's going to be holding the bag for all $900. And if your friend decides that they are going to, go out and, skip town or go on a vacation with the rent money, you're going to be responsible for that. Be careful about making yourself responsible for the irresponsibility of other people. A better arrangement is if you can have your landlord agree that you can co-sign a lease and that payments are made directly to the landlord. So be careful about making yourself that person who could be left holding the bag. So better is a signed agreement where individual payments are made directly to landlords. One more word to friends. The Bible tells us, and as a Christian, I hope you have this heart, give to him who asks of you, and from him who desires, do not turn away. You're probably familiar with that from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus challenges us that we should be willing to give. But also in the same sense, you need to understand that there are things that you cannot give. It's amazing how irresponsible friends can be so bold in asking for things. Have you ever seen this amongst people that you know? People who are not responsible will come to those people who are responsible and ask if they can borrow the things that they don't have because they've been irresponsible. Now, while we should be willing to give and willing to help as much as possible, we also have to remember that we can't become, in a sense, surety for a friend. It's a foolish thing for us to do. We can't endanger ourselves because of someone else's irresponsibility. You don't have to loan things, or you shouldn't be willing to loan things that you can't afford to give away. There are going to be times when people will come and ask you for something that, frankly, you can't afford to lose. And as a Christian, you have this sense of guilt in your heart, and you want to say, I want to help you, but you're irresponsible. Yeah, you need to borrow my car because, you drove yours into a tree because you drink and drive all the time, and now you want to borrow my car so that you can go to the bar? Now, aside from the morality involved in that, let's stop and think about this for a minute. If they crash your tree into a car and you got no way to get to work, all of a sudden you're in trouble, right? Was that a smart decision? So, yeah, we ought to be willing to give, but we also have to understand that there are things that we cannot give. If I can use another adage, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. And you have to realize that when it comes to friendships and when it comes to enabling the irresponsibility of other people, it's a foolish thing, and we shouldn't do it. And yeah, if somebody comes and they need some help, and yeah, even if they don't deserve it, if it's something you can give to them, help them out. But it is a foolish and unnecessary thing to carry responsibility for other people who do not, or who are not willing to carry it. And it really should be on us for those people who are irresponsible to try and help them. And we need to be careful about putting ourselves in a situation. And if we do find ourselves in a situation where we are responsible for someone who is irresponsible, make sure we follow the primary force of this passage to tell, or to say, make sure that you stay on them. Be diligent, as it says here, to plead with them. Give no sleep to your eyes or slumber to your eyelids, because really what you're doing is delivering yourself from their trouble. Make them be responsible. So the first part of this passage really deals with the idea of not carrying another person's responsibility unnecessarily. Now, I'll finish something at the end about this. There are times when we do need to help people out, though, right? There are times when we need to be generous. There are times when we do help people out, and we'll look at that at the end. So number 2, you should be responsible personally so that you can be ready for the future. In a sense, the first couple of verses are getting us ready for this next segment, because it's laying out for us the story of a person who is irresponsible and the kind of problems that they will cause you if you associate yourself with them. So now what's going to happen in this next segment of verses is really going to look back at the first few and say, don't be that guy. Don't be that girl. Don't be like this guy who's irresponsible, who's making other people chase them around to do what they're supposed to be doing. Don't be that person. Be responsible. The Bible terms this kind of person who's irresponsible the sluggard. The lazy person is a term that's used throughout the book of Proverbs, and it gives us an illustration. It gives us an illustration about what we should do. And it tells us, go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. If there's anything that's common in this world, it's ants. And if you've been in other places in the world, you recognize that ants are even more common in other places than they are here. I've been to Zambia a couple of times, and it was amazing to me the first time I went over there how many ants there are. And you say, well, how do you know how many ants there are? Well, you don't necessarily always see the ants. But what you do see is these great big mounds all over the place. In fact, it's really kind of funny because when you look around, they don't have in most of the places you go, especially out in the rural areas, they don't have water systems like we do. They don't have water pumps like we do. But if they do sink a well, if there's a property out there where they do have running water, they'll sink a well down, and then you have to put up a water tower so that you have water pressure. You know what they often use for the water towers? Anthills. The anthills are so big that they're actually using them as the structure for water towers, and they'll go up to the anthill, they'll put a great big, plastic container on top of the anthill, because if you do anything with wood, the ants are going to eat it, all right? But they use steel and plastic, and they put a tower up there, they run a line up there, they pump the water up there, but these anthills are everywhere, all over the place. And they're mostly termites. They're actual wood-eating termites. And these hills are everywhere. These ants do a lot. In fact, the ant hills are somewhat useful. They use them for water towers. They actually use the dirt in them to make bricks, because what the ants do when they kind of chew up the dirt is they turn it into a really fine powder. And they have found by experience that when they dig out the sides of the ant hills and then wet that down and bake that into bricks, it makes really strong bricks. So I'm sure there's some kind of chemical component with ant spit, kind of gluing it all together too, But it's amazing what an ant can do. We went and we tried to knock the top off of one of these towers last time I was there, because they wanted to put a water container on the top of that tower. So they said, hey, we got a couple of odds and ends jobs. If you guys are willing to help us out, while you're here, go ahead and do it. So we grabbed a pickaxe and we started going at the top of one of these towers. Now, immediately I'm like, is this safe? Because this is an awfully big tower. That means there's got to be a lot of, are they going to come after me? I'm picturing remember that Indiana Jones movie, the one nobody likes to talk about with all the ants, and they pick up the people and they drag them in the hole and the people are screaming as the ants are eating them. I'm like, eee. So this is what I have going through my mind, right? No, these are little ants. They said, no, they're fine. Their ants are way down in there. So we started trying to knock the top off of this tower. I'll tell you what, that was cement hard. And it's amazing. I was surprised there were actually quite a few ants that did come out. I'm like, making sure they're not eating me first, I'm getting ready to run and rush, But it's amazing how much work those ants can do. I mean, that is a massive tower, and we had three full-grown guys going with pickaxes on the top of that thing, and it took us quite a while to knock that tower off. It was hard. It's a lot of work moving all that dirt. Those tiny little ants made that great big tower. Ants are a marvel, right? It has been documented that ants can carry up to 20 times their body weight. So, some species of ants, they say maybe up to 50, somewhere between 10 and 20 times their body weight is the average. So humans, even a strong human, can't really carry more than 2 times their body weight for over an extended period of time, even if you try and picture that. Most of us, 1.5, if we can carry our own body weight, It's amazing. Ants have strong necks. They do most of what they pick up and carry. They pick up not with their mouths, but they have little things called mandibles. They're like little pincher things on the front there. They don't actually bite with those. If you ever get bit by an ant, you're actually not getting bit. You're actually getting stung. Ants do have stingers, some of them. But the ants, when they pick stuff up, if I could put this in correlation to the amount of weight that an ant is able to pick up and put on its back with its mandibles and turn its neck and put that weight up there, is about equivalent to you going into the kitchen, grabbing a refrigerator with your mouth and turning and putting it on your back. Could you picture that? Ants have strong necks. You know what else is kind of interesting about ants is that they only sleep about 5 hours a day. Now, ants have a system, most of them have a system, they actually take power naps. They take 200 plus little power naps, 1-minute power naps throughout the day. So they sleep somewhere around, on average, around 5 hours a day. So that when you go look at an ant, 80% of the workforce at any given time is active and working. In an anthill, 80% of that workforce at any given time is working. Of course, ants do hibernate. They hibernate for 3 to 4 months during the winter because they couldn't survive the severe cold. When it gets cold, their bodies go into a really slow stage, and of course, in the anthills, they go down where they don't freeze all the way, and they huddle together to save warmth. But ants are amazing. It's amazing how much a little ant can do, and the kind of trouble that they can make. Right, in places sometimes, they are hard workers. So the Bible is going to use the ant as an illustration for us. And it's going to say this about the ant. It's going to talk about this, which having no captain or overseer or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. And the ant is a good illustration for us, number one, and it's using this really as the example of being a responsible person, right? And the first reason they're a good example for us is they work hard. And I think the application for us is that responsible people work hard. And a person who works hard is the kind of person who works hard even without constraint. You'll see the first thing that's noted is that they have no captain, overseer, or ruler. Now, I think we know and we've learned, from observational science that there are structures inside of an anthill, and there are queens and there are workers, and and there is a structure in there. But I think the point the Bible is making is that if you take a magnifying glass and you look down at that ant hill and you see the ants coming out, there isn't one ant who's standing up on a little stone going, "Go, go, go." There is no ant that has a little piece of grass that's going, "Come on, you lazy ants, get to work." You know, there is no one who drives an ant. By its very nature, an ant works hard. And it doesn't work hard because there's somebody standing over them making them do it. If you've ever had to be a supervisor, you know there's nothing more frustrating than having a worker who won't do anything unless you're standing over them, making them do it. A worker who requires, observation, a worker who requires you checking meticulously their work because they are going to try and cut any corner that they can. They're going to try and, hide any bit of laziness that they can. They're going to try and sneak out from having to do any responsibility that they can get away from. And the Bible describes the wisdom of the ant as being the kind of person who works hard, a kind of person who works without constraint, the kind of person who is willing to, we would say in this case, take responsibility. We ought to be the kind of people where if we have a supervisor, our supervisor can look at us and say, "Hey, I want you to do this job." And they can look at us and the job gets done. We figure it out. We figure out the details. We don't cut corners. We're responsible. That's what the word responsible means, right? We're the kind of person who actually takes on the job and sees it all the way to completion. That's the opposite, by the way, of being lazy. How many times do we see jobs partially done? Jobs that are unfinished. That's laziness. But the Bible encourages us to be responsible, to work even without constraint. Number 2, you'll notice that it talks about working while we have opportunity. We have an old saying here in farm country, you got to make hay while the sun shines, right? And it's interesting when you think about it. Of course, the ant has a limited opportunity. They hibernate for 3 to 4 months out of the year. They have to store up enough body fat before the winter to make sure that that body fat will sustain them through their hibernation and into the spring. And if they don't do it, what happens? They die. Now, I don't know that an ant is actually thinking that. I think they're probably more driven by instinct that God has programmed into them. But that ant works tirelessly. And they are working all the time. And they have this period of time in which they can work. And it says they gather her food in the harvest and provide her supplies in the summer. And the ant is out there working and working and working. It's amazing when you think about it. The best time for play and the best time for work often conflict with each other, don't they? Oh, it's a beautiful sunny day. And responsible people are going, "Oh, it's a good day to get some work done." Everyone else is going, "Ooh, it's a great day for the beach. It's a great day for fishing. It's a great day for," you name it, right? And isn't it amazing that the best times for play are also the best times to get work done? A responsible person is a person who sees opportunities to get work done and gets them done. You should work while you have opportunity. A lot of times people today, and especially younger generations, I think it's a characteristic of youth. And you learn over time, if you're going to be responsible, you don't wait around for work to be convenient. You just go get it done. Yeah, you might feel like doing it more tomorrow, but you don't know what tomorrow holds. You don't know if something's going to get in the way of you getting it done tomorrow, but you do have a chance to get it done today. So get it done today. Be responsible. You have opportunity. You have time to get your work done. Get your work done. So when you look at the weather forecast and you see a day where it's dry and the grass is dry, what do? You go cut the grass.
Cut
the grass. Right? Why? Because it's dry and it needs to get cut, so let's cut it now before the rain comes. It's interesting as you study through the book of Proverbs, there's so many stories here. Let's keep going here. It's lazy people, when you look at this, it says this. It says, "How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from sleep?" Isn't it amazing that lazy people often fail? That's the point of this, right? Poverty's coming. Want is coming. They fail. Well, why do they fail? Because they don't really have a plan. They're driven by their feelings. And if you allow your feelings to drive you, here's the thing. You're never going to do work, are you? Do you ever feel like doing work? I mean, really, ever? Maybe sometimes, right? Because the pile of dishes is so big on the counter, this is getting disgusting, I got to get these things out of here, it's going to drive me nuts, right? But if there's not something that you're required to do you ever go, oh, I think I just want to work? Well, maybe not. If God is working in you, hopefully you have a desire to work hard and to accomplish things, but I think the natural man never really feels like doing work, right? We'd always rather play. We'd always rather go fishing. We'd always rather watch TV or a movie or play video games or whatever that may be. It's funny, another great proverbial adage here that goes along the way. People never plan to fail, they only what? Fail to plan. If you don't have a plan, you are planning to fail. Seriously. The first thing that we have when the sluggard is addressed here is this. Okay, so when are you going to get up? What's the plan? And the answer is there is no plan, because lazy people don't plan failure, but they fall into it. There's a lack of planning, which is characteristic of laziness. In order to do work, it takes a plan. I always tell the kids when it comes to doing a job, the first quarter of the job is setup. The middle half of the job is actually doing the job, and the last quarter of the job is cleanup. And it's in that setup time you plan your job. You got to figure stuff out. If you don't want to drip paint on the ground, you got to lay out a drop cloth when you're painting, right? And you have to take time. A lot of times guys will spray paint something in the garage, and then all of a sudden they go over to their car and they go, "What's all this stuff all over my car?" Well, that's called overspray. Oh, you shouldn't have spray painted in the garage. That was kind of a lousy idea. You should have maybe thought this out ahead of time, right? How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from sleep? See, rest is necessary, right? You have to sleep. If you're going to have a hard day's work or a good day's work, you want to have a good night's rest before. That's the best way to get work done, right? But what's the plan? At some point, there has to be a time where we say, all right, it's time to quit playing, it's time to get something done. And there's got to be a plan. Number 2, I want you to notice a little delay leads to failure. I don't think anyone ever looks at a project and says, I'm just going to ignore this one and hope it gets done on its own, although maybe some people do that. I know some lazy people who might say that, right? But I think people generally look at a task and they say, I don't really feel like doing this right now. We'll get to it later, right? Procrastinators unite tomorrow. Right? There it is. All right. Just a little sleep, the Bible says. Just a little slumber, just a little folding of the hands to sleep. I'm just going to watch one episode on Netflix. And like 2 hours later, it actually stops and says, are you still watching this? Have you ever gotten that message? If you've ever gotten that message from your streaming service that says, hey, I just want to check to make sure you didn't just like start this on accident and walk away because it's been going for hours and hours and hours. Okay, you probably are doing this right here, right? Just a little sleep, just a little slumber, just a little TV before I get to my job, right? What happens? Well, a little delay leads to failure. You know, it's interesting, a lazy person can find 10,000 excuses why this is a horrible time to do this job, can't they? I find it interesting. It says this in the book of Proverbs a little bit later on. A lazy man is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. I think this is describing this idea that, 7 people explaining to you why this needs to be now really doesn't matter, because a real, truly lazy person will be able to outthink all 7 of those people who are making good sense. All right? Yeah, people are terribly skilled at getting out of work, some of them, aren't they? Laziness is a skill, and one that's all too common. And it's just a little delay that leads to failure. It can be just a little sleep, a little slumber. Oh, I just need a little bit more rest. Well, you need rest, right? I mean, you can look at yourself and you can say, oh, I got more work I ought to be doing. I'm not going to sleep at night. Well, that doesn't last very long before you burn yourself out, right? You can only do so much. You can only carry so many burdens. And if you try and carry more burdens than you're supposed to, you burn out. But there's also another side of this where we can be lazy. How do I know if I'm sleeping too long? How do I know if I'm being too lazy? Well, I go to Proverbs 20:14 on this one, and it says this: as a door turns on its hinges, so the lazy man upon his bed. If you're laying in bed and you're waking up and rolling over and waking up and rolling over and waking up and rolling over, and now it's 10:30 in the morning and you're still waking up and rolling over, okay, chances are you've probably done too long. But if you're tired and you go to bed and you don't wake up until 7, 8, sometimes maybe even 9 o'clock, if you don't wake up, it's probably because your body needs the sleep. You probably need the rest. Maybe you're fighting off an infection of some kind. Maybe you had a big day yesterday and you're exhausted. When you're exhausted and you sleep and you don't wake up and you sleep, you shouldn't feel guilty about sleeping. But when you're laying there in bed and rolling over because you just don't want to face the day, yeah, maybe there's a problem there. You're being lazy. It's interesting how lazy a lazy person can be. Proverbs chapter 26, I think it's verse 14, says the lazy man buries his hand, or verse 15, the lazy man buries his hand in the bowl, and it wearies him to bring it back to his mouth. Now, how lazy is that? Now, I think if we were going to put this in today's terminology, it's probably dips his hand in a bag of chips, right? If we want to be honest, right? Okay. Because if you're really lazy and you're a couch potato, you're probably eating a potato chip, right? And a lazy man can be so lazy that it's too much work to grab a chip from the bag to bring it to your mouth. That's how bad this can be. But at some point in your life, you probably either have found or will find yourself feeling just like this. When you're so lazy that it's too much work to eat, you might have a problem. All right? Lazy people can need more rest, sure. Legitimately, but really? Or are you just being lazy? Lazy people are often full of excuses when it comes to work. Here's 100 reasons why it's just not a good time for this. Proverbs 26:13, the lazy man says, there is a lion in the road, a fierce lion in the streets. It's dangerous out there. I can't go to work. It's too dangerous. But you can make it to the bar? This is Wisconsin, okay, let's be honest. None of us can go to work, but they're all down at the pub. Really? What is that? Well, it's laziness. Proverbs 20 and verse 4, the lazy man will not plow because of winter. Oh, it's too cold. It's too cold. I mean, just look out here like Wisconsin, right? Our farmers. How many times do you go by a farm field and it's 10 o'clock at night and they got the lights on in the tractor and they're out there? And they're out there in the field working. Why? Because you know what? It's dry enough. And this is the time when it's time to get work done. Well, you could find 10,000 excuses why tomorrow is a better time. But if you have the opportunity to get it done, get out there and get it done. Now, our farmers learn this wisdom from practical experience. Because if you don't do it, next thing you know, you got the combine stuck in the mud because you didn't get the corn off. And sometimes there isn't an opportunity. We had that a couple of years ago, right? I mean, we were people pulling combines out of fields all over the place out here. They had the bulldozers, they were yanking them out because it was raining so much in the fall, they had to get it off. And they couldn't wait any longer. And it wasn't for lack of patience. You don't want to find yourself tugging your combine out of the field with the bulldozer, right? That's a problem. So lazy people will often find themselves figuratively tugging the combine out of the field with the bulldozer, but not because they didn't have a chance, because they were too lazy to do it when they had the chance. The Bible says be responsible. Get that job done, and don't leave it till later. By the way, the lazy man who will not plow because of winter, the Bible warns he will beg during harvest and have nothing. If you don't work when it's inconvenient, you're going to find that you're not going to have what you need because it's never convenient. So just get out there and get it done. The Bible warns that laziness leads to certain failure. Notice the outcome. If you can sum up Proverbs in one simple phrase, the whole book, it's this: actions have consequences. That's really what wisdom is all about. Actions have consequences. So pick your consequences by picking your actions. Now, it's a general terminology. Proverbs are not promises, they're proverbs. It's what's normal, it's what usually happens. But here you go. What happens when you're lazy? Your poverty comes on you like a prowler. That means you're going to be in trouble and you're not going to see it coming. If you saw it coming, you'd have done something about it, right? But the problem with laziness is that it puts you into a slumber or a sleep where you're really not looking, you don't notice, you don't see the trouble coming, and then all of a sudden the kid who doesn't do his homework all year long reaches his senior year of high school and goes, I'm not going to graduate? Oh. The kid who sloughed off and did all the work applies to go to college, and the college goes, not with those grades. And they go, what? I didn't see that coming. Well, you should have listened when people were encouraging you to be diligent earlier on. Poverty comes like a prowler. It talks about that danger being unexpected. Lastly, trouble comes powerfully. It says, and your need like an armed man. What happens? You think you're ready for it, but it comes on you and overcomes you powerfully like an armed person would overcome you. You got jumped and overcome by trouble. Why? Because you were lazy. Now, let's be honest. We all have a tendency to be like this, don't we? We all have a tendency to be lazy. But beware, because God's plan for people is for each of us to be responsible for ourselves, not to carry others' responsibilities unnecessarily, but to be the kind of person who's responsible. You might be familiar with this poem by Edgar Albert Guest. It's called, It Couldn't Be Done. Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he, with a chuckle, replied that maybe it couldn't, but he'd be the one who wouldn't say so till he tried. So he buckled right in with the trace of a grin on his face. If he worried, he hid it. He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Somebody scoffed, oh, you'll never do that. At least no one has ever done it. But he took off his coat, and he took off his hat, and the thing we knew, he'd begun it. With a lift of his chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit it, he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle in with a bit of a grin. Just take off your coat and go to it. Just start to sing as you tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. It's talking about the power of responsibility and diligence. You see, this is God's plan A for us, isn't it? Be responsible for yourself and do it. See, God's design for humanity involves each person being responsible for themselves. So go and do it. Father, we thank you for your wisdom and your grace. Lord, help us to be responsible. Help us to face laziness and to overcome it by the power of the gospel, recognizing that we are here for greater reasons than to follow our feelings and desires, but that we're here to accomplish a task that you have given to mankind, and more specifically to us personally, that we may bring order to chaos, that we may bring solutions to problems, and that we may bring the gospel to people who haven't heard it. So help us, Lord, to be diligent in Jesus' name. Amen. A word as we finish about the need for generosity. I told you I would do this at the end. I'm sorry, I was going to do this before I read that poem. There is a place for generosity. I think sometimes, as in particular in our country, we can look at people who are irresponsible and we can say, "You made your bed? Lay in it." Now, there are times when we need to do that with people, frankly. It doesn't help people to bail them out of their troubles. In fact, one of the worst things you can do as a parent for an irresponsible child is to keep bailing them out of the problems they make. Let them carry their own burdens. If they're irresponsible, if they need to do another year of high school, don't go in there and yell at the teacher because your kid didn't do their work, right? So we every now and again you see people who as parents show up at work and try and tell their bosses how they need to handle their children. Okay, no. Don't be like that, right? But there are times when people do need help. There are times when trouble comes in people's lives and they need help. As Christians, especially if they're fellow believers, we shouldn't look at people and say, "Hey, look, you made your bed." Okay, there is a time and a place for that. But there is also, we have to recognize we need to have compassion on people in need. And sometimes things come and there's nothing they can do about it. And you just need to help them out. Sometimes they saw it coming and they've been trying to do the right thing, and we just need to act in grace. Sometimes we tell people no. As a general rule, I got a call yesterday from somebody looking for money from the church. As a general rule, we don't give out money to people we don't know. People are always just looking for money. I'm sorry. You know, we've bought too much beer and drugs for people over the years. You know, we're just not doing that. You know, that's the long and the short of that. And cigarettes, because if you have to choose between getting gas in your car to get to work and cigarettes always wins for some reason. I don't know why, but it does. So, yeah, we need to be careful, but also, especially when it comes to the body, when people need help, yeah, maybe they could have foreseen it coming. You know, maybe they could have saved better. We can help our people that we know, who we know are trying to walk with God. If they make a mistake, have some grace. Number two, we talk about co-signing and about those things. When it comes to family, you know, sometimes parents are always struggling. Hey, I got this kid and they're trying to get a car loan to buy their first car. Should I co-sign or not? The Bible tells me I shouldn't co-sign. Actually, if you do a study through the scriptures, you'll find God actually calls himself the co-signer of his people. Okay. You can find that in the scriptures. It's spoken notably, or spoken well of in a couple of places. I think in our case where it's family. You know, if you've got a kid who's being responsible and they're trying to do the right thing, and this is just the way things work, you don't have credit until you can get it. Well, where do you get it? Okay, at some point, somebody needs some help. Don't be afraid. Make sure you're not overextending yourself to help someone out, and especially if somebody is irresponsible. You know, maybe they need to do something else first. But
like you said, if you can afford it, because that person might want to pay tax, but what happens if they get injured?
Yeah.
You know, there's things that can happen, so we have to be in a position where you can actually take that burden on without
Agreed.
going down ourselves.
Yeah, make sure you don't give something you can't give.
Right.
You don't have to give. So, all right. So just a couple of thoughts for you there as we finish. So I hope that's been a challenge for you about being responsible. Cut the